Yep.
Okay. Should now have everything that I am saying on the screen here. I'm going to hit share. And let's pull up my screen here. So EC-6 history for the 291 or the 391, sir?
391.
391. That's a better test, I feel like. I think the 291 is a bit outdated and they've really improved the overall experience. So I don't know if you ever took the 291, but a 391 is a better test. So let's get right into it. You said you want to talk about the American Revolution time period. We'll
Yes.
start with that first. I think that's the biggest area we need to talk about. There's a good chunk of things going on in the American Revolution. I like to think of the American Revolution, especially the American Revolution, as a more of a cause and effect sort of events. That's the best way to break it down. And you don't feel like it's just memorize, memorize, memorize. It's more like being in the story and seeing the events fold out. The American Revolution is also factors for what happens with the Bill of Rights, the amendments and whatnot. And so we're going to see questions on the test that relate to the American Revolution, even if they aren't like specifically mentionable questions. So I like to mention that because you might see a question simply, what's the fourth Bill of Rights? Well, believe it or not, the Bill of Rights themselves are influenced by the events of the American Revolution. So just mentioning that might clarify anything about that in a little bit. But let's start with the American Revolution, the events in itself, the cause and effect. So there's two sides to what's going on. There's two different groups of people. There's the people called the Great Britain people, and then there's, of course, the colonists. And for moving forward, I'm going to refer to the Great Britain GB. That's the bad people. Colonists are obviously blue, so they're good people. Blue is a pretty nice friendly color. The thing with Great Britain is that Great Britain is fighting a war. They're fighting a war called the French and Indian War. I'm just going to call it FI, French Indian War. French FI War, French and Indian War. The French and Indian War is really just a battle of territory. And long story short, France is trying to acquire land. Great Britain's trying to fight for land. And there's no real set in stone where the war begins and ends. It's just events that started happening, which turned into a war in itself. The problem is that Great Britain needs money. They need money to be able to continue fighting in this war. And there's no better place for them to start borrowing or taking money from the colonists than right now. And we call this taxation. And so when Great Britain starts taxing the colonists really have no idea what's going on. We don't have time to go through a whole 300, 400 period of what's happening with the colonists, but just know that they've lived there for almost 200, 300 years without any interventions. Nobody's come in and said anything. And so when Great Britain comes in and starts asking them to pay taxes for things, the colonists have no idea who these people are. And very few people even remember Great Britain, the mother nation, the people who brought them there to begin with. So when taxation starts happening, colonists are like, why is this going on? So one of the key concepts in the Great Britain time period that they use for making money purposes is mercantilism. This is a big term you might see on a test. It's a big concept that really helps explain the big issues going on in the colony areas. So the concept of mercantilism is simple. The colonists are allowed to buy goods from Great Britain, but they're not allowed to produce their own goods. This sounds okay until you remember that Great Britain is on the other side of the globe. And so the cost of manufacturing and sending goods to the colonists, well, they're paying for it. They're paying for all of this, and it's expensive. So the colonists have no choice but to go along by this for the simple reason that, well, Great Britain controls everything. They control how things are made, they control where things are produced. And so the colonists are just living off of that standard. And it's a horrible standard. It's not a good one. It's a sad face. Nobody likes that. Mercantilism is a big cause and effect. When the colonies start reacting, start fighting back against Great Britain, that's when trouble really starts, because when the colonists start fighting, Great Britain, instead of really going and fighting back, they just start issuing more taxations. You've heard about the Boston Tea Party. That's the more talked about, I should say. The Boston Tea Party is a big one, but there's other things that are going on besides that, even prior. So there's things like the Sugar Act. There is the Townsend Act, which the Townsend Act is just a fancy term for anything you can produce in your household, anything like that. The Stamp Act and stuff like that. Every single one of these was passed in an attempt to basically kind of take money from the colonists for the war without really saying it's illegal, because the colonists really had no idea who they were giving the money to or why they were giving it to. And the Boston Tea Party is one of the pinnacle peak moments, because this is when the colonists really start retaliating. And we hear the term no taxation without representation. What does that mean? Well, if Great Britain is on the other side of the ocean and there's no one over here telling them who the money is being given to, the representative is not there. There's no one there for the colonists to talk to about who's taxing who and why. And so we hear the term no taxation without representation, clearly meaning that the colonists don't want to be taxed to someone they've never even met. Mm-hmm. So Sugar Act, you do not need to know the specific things these acts really are about. Just know that they are bad. These are bad things. Sugar Act clearly is about sugar. I mentioned the Townsend Act. The Stamp Act is pretty straightforward. It's about stamps and stuff. There's one last one we have to talk about, a very effective one, which is kind of the pinnacle peak one. We call this one the Intolerable Act. The Intolerable Act basically shut down supplies for the colonists. It shut down harbors. It shut down ways in which they were able to trade. And when the Intolerable Act was mentioned, that's when the colonists lost it. They said, we have to fight. We have no choice, because now they've locked us out of our own country, basically. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty terrible things to be occurring at the time. And these are kind of reasons for why we came up with the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. They kind of surround the idea of no more taxes, no more expenses for no darn reason. So these are just a couple of things going on. I do want to mention a few other significant documents you will probably see on the test besides just the Great Britain colonists period. There's a few things that we need to talk about. A couple of them I'm going to mention are the Mayflower Compact. You will see this on the test. 1620 Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact is a one man, one vote. And when people were coming into the New World, a Mayflower Compact was just basically saying that we need to set the standard for how the rest of the world is going to behave later on. So the Mayflower Compact, one man, one vote. Okay. You will see this on the test because it's kind of a demonstration of what would later be our modern day democracy. It would be the basic standard. That's why it's so irrelevant. It doesn't really make sense to us, but the Pilgrims really were the founders, so to speak, of modern day ideas. So the Mayflower Compact is very big. Another one we gotta know is the Virginia House of Burgesses. I can spell this right. I have no idea how to spell Burgesses. I think that's right.
That looks right.
looks good enough to me. If it looks good enough to you, we'll take it. Yep. Virginia House of Burgesses. This is the first governing body. You can think of this as your very first Congress, so to speak. Now, we didn't consider it a Congress or anything on the legislative level, but it is the first time it's been set up in a way which allowed for modeling of how we were going to shape the US Congress later on, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to very short and simply put the first legislative body. And that's pretty big because, well, up until this point, we've had no Congress-like law-passing body area in the whole colony area. So when the Virginia House of Burgesses started, we really got to see what the colonists were kind of in favor of, what they actually were okay with. They didn't like anything up here. They said, no more taxing, no more of this. We want something more democratic, something that's going to be more useful to the people. Last one we got to talk about is the fundamental orders of Connecticut. I'm going to put very short and simply fundamental. Ooh, I can't spell. Fundamental orders of CT. I don't think I can ever spell Connecticut, save my life. But this is another, this is considered to be, in the short and simple sense, it's nothing particularly that important to us nowadays, but it's considered to be the very first government. It's only relevant to Connecticut, but it's still fundamentally pretty important. And this broadens the rights of voters. And for the first time, you didn't just have to be white and wealthy. You could be any free man and vote. So instead of just giving it to the all powerful and mighty people of the world, now it's anybody can vote. So anyone, I should say any free man. So we still haven't had men, or I'm sorry, women allowed in that. Any free men allowed to vote. So pretty big. These are, you'll see these in question form in some way, shape, or form. I really don't know how likely you'll see the Connecticut for more fundamental orders of Connecticut, but you will see Virginia House of Burgesses, Mayflower Compact in some way. So pay attention to those terms. They're easy questions you can miss. And when you're shaking your head, you've probably seen something of this on the test.
Yes.
It will be on the test. And I mean, this is like the American Revolution. This isn't even the big, juicy portions of the American Revolution, but you're not going to see the exciting moments of battles on the test. They're just going to give you factual information from the American Revolution. There's a few other things I got to mention real quick. After the American Revolution is over, long story short, we won. We won for a number of reasons. The main reason being that we had more people, and Great Britain's on the other side of the world bringing soldiers, whereas we have just lots of people here to fight. So there's a few battles I do want to mention. Battle of Saratoga is the first one. Battle of Saratoga. A lot of fights are happening in the American Revolution. You're not going to see every battle on the test, but you might see Saratoga on a test because it's the turning point in New York. This is the turning point in the war. And that's what makes it so famous, is this key detail, a turning point. Up until this point, we didn't really see the American people winning the war, but the Battle of Saratoga was considered to be the stepping stone to where we would eventually win, and George Washington would get his monumental leap to presidency later on moving forward. So the last battle of the American Revolution that's relevant to us. There's many tiny battles, but the last major battle is the Battle of Yorktown. So if you see questions relating to some of these, they're probably looking for key details that relate to turning point or the last major battle. They're not going to ask you about who was the general in charge. They're not going to ask you about the major leaders. They're really interested in beginning, middle, end, just like with Texas history. They want to know where did it start, why did it start, and when did it end? Those are the kind of things. So that's what I like to stick to. There's plenty of videos I can mention all of these in greater detail, but they will take you 10 hours or more. So we got to talk about American Revolution period. There's some great people that are going to be on this test. A few of which we have to talk about are involved with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution themselves. James Madison is considered the founder of our Constitution. And he's considered a founder for a very specific reason. He wrote the most of it. No one else wrote as much as he did. So his part, what he wrote and established for us, is why we give him credit as the founder of the Constitution. If you see a question asking about James Madison, look for Constitution. That's just very bare and simple, and you can't miss it otherwise.
Okay.
There is a bunch of other things going on here, but I just want to mention that you said American Revolution colony period. I hope this is covering the big chunk of stuff that you're concerned with.
Definitely.
I said there's a lot in history. I don't want to waste any time. After the American Revolution period, if we're going chronologically in order, the American Revolution period legitimately ended about 1777, moving downward. And so after that, we have later on a few things going on. We have the War of 1812.
Mhm.
In the War of 1812, and this is my favorite war, by the way, in history. War of 1812, no one won. The whole war effort was to prevent trading with Great Britain. And this is like the last final thing where we kind of said, all right, Great Britain, we actually want to produce things for ourselves. And so this war in itself was a catalyst, or it really sped up our wanting to industrialize for ourselves. So I consider it the trigger of the Industrial Revolution.
Mhm.
So you see how I'm kind of like pinpointing the big highlights. I don't think the test wants you to know about the key people as much. I mean, unless it's like, Constitution related and James Madison, maybe you want to know about the Bill of Rights and stuff like that, but you don't need to know about the key people as much as you think on a test. So after that War of 1812, that's when you go westward expansion, everything onward. I want to stop here because we're going like fast and I want to like slow down a little bit. Is there any specific details that I've mentioned that you'd like to know a little bit more about? Anything in particular?
Kind of all this stuff I somewhat do know because of my history class I took in college and high school and middle school.
Right. It's been a while though.
But yeah, it's been a while. But the one that I really don't really understand and I actually really never learned about until I hit college was the fundamentals orders of Connecticut. I never
Mhm.
even heard about that until I hit my first history class in college.
And that's probably just because of the fact that it's not in Texas, it's in Connecticut. And if you lived in Connecticut, you probably would have heard about it every single year and knew every detail about it. And I don't want you to stress that because that in itself, at most, is one question on a test. The information that I do feel like you definitely want to know about is, what is mercantilism? That doesn't seem like a big concept, but it's not something that we really know about until you've studied it.
Okay.
The concept of mercantilism. The opposite of mercantilism, I'll put this right here now that I think about it, is free enterprise system.
Isn't that what we are, though? Isn't that
That
what
is what
America
we
is?
are. Yes, sir. Free enterprise system is the modern day world of supply and demand. It's what we got. This is what we have followed since then. Mercantilism is what Great Britain preferred because it involved them making money off of us for anything we wanted to buy. So,
Okay.
and I would say mercantilism is a realistic question you might get on a test. You may not get questions about the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, or anything like that, but you're going to get a question about taxation. And so understanding why Great Britain decided to tax the people really does help you understand the concept. It wasn't just because they looked at us and said, puny bunch of colonies that have never governed themselves. It's more of, we need your money to support fighting and, expanding and whatever. Virginia House of Burgesses, first legislated by, hands down, simplest question you will see on the test. You can't miss it if you know it. If you've never heard of it, you'll probably miss it. Mayflower Compact, one man, one vote. This is the deciding factor of how we're supposed to treat each other coming to the New World. And the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, it's kind of the same thing. I kind of talked about it on a sense of like expanding on the rights of individuals. It's just following the same concept of the first body, the first way in which we're supposed to have voting. This is just getting a little bit better at that. So I don't want you to think that you need to know too much about it. You might see it on the test though.
Okay.
Battle of Saratoga, turning point of the American Revolution. This is a huge battle, and you can watch a video on YouTube on it, and it shows you just how important that battle is. Without this battle, we may not have won the war. Battle of Yorktown is the last major battle before the war is really pretty much decided. And James Madison, founder of Constitution, you'll probably see a question on that because, hey, it's James Madison. He's pretty cool. He's also got the best name in the world. And I could go on and on. There's a couple of things I want to mention, though, about Bill of Rights and such. And I'm not sure how much you've studied for the test. But if you're talking, excuse me, about the colonies and such, Bill of Rights is relevant. Bill of Rights is pretty big. And were you in my social studies session I had a number of weeks ago? It was like a 1 to 2 hour long session on Zoom. No. Okay. Well, that's fair. I was just curious because that kind of helps me take apart what I don't need to go over. I'm going to go over some of this with you because I do think you need to know it.
Okay.
After the American Revolution is concluded, there is a problem. There is no constitution. There is no government. There's no idea what we're going to do. And so we decide that we're going to start with the legislative body. Legislative body starts with an L, the same as the word law. And that's why I like to think of it as the lawmaking body. And that's all we have is the legislative branch. The problem is that the legislative branch doesn't have any real power. It just has law creating capabilities. And so we later start with the other three branches, the executive, and judicial. I like to underline the letters. It spells ledge, like legislative, so it helps me remember how you were supposed to start and end with it. The executive branch is going to be your president. We need a president because we need someone who is going to more or less follow on and have the power to pass the laws that we as individuals agree upon. So we have the power to veto as a president. That's about it. And then you have the judicial branch, which is going to relate more to the court systems. They have the power to decide if laws are even constitutional. Beyond this, there is a lot of things you ought to know about. I would say Bill of Rights is pretty big because it's so easy for them to just ask you about a single individual right and say, what is this? If you don't know it, you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, when I was studying about these Bill of Rights, when I was one of my professors mentioned something that I found very interesting that relates to the colony period, that relates back to the American Revolution. During the colony period, the Great Britain people actually started pulling the rights of the individual colonist. They started with something as simple as the freedom of speech. They said, you can't talk about us in a bad way. You can't say or share anything that's going to make us look bad. And then they started taking away their guns because they said, if they don't have any guns, how else are they going to fight us? So no guns. And then beyond that, they also passed something that they call the Quartering Act. And this is basically how they kept their soldiers from going and starving. They would tell them that you can go into any colony home and the colonists are by law required to take care of you. And so we have the Quartering Act, which we would later dismiss in the Bill of Rights of quartering of soldiers. So these rights, individually speaking, don't seem like much, but they're based on what we fought for in the American Revolution. And so if you're like trying to find a way to kind of break this down in a way that makes sense and just memorizing, I would relate it to the American Revolution because they connect perfectly. So,
okay.
A warrant, you need a warrant before you enter someone's home and look for things as a police officer. That's the fourth one. And then the fifth one is the right to remain silent. So yeah. Beyond this, you can go as far as to connect some of the major court cases that you're probably going to see on the test to these rights as well. I'm just going to mention the court cases because they are likely to be seen on the test. The court cases that I know for a fact will always be on a test. The first and biggest one is the Miranda. Not that one. I always get confused. They both start with an M. Marbury versus Madison.
Yes, always.
Always on a test. You say that, you've seen that, you know it. Do you know which one this one is? Just off of memory?
No, the big three I always know that are gonna be on there. Is that one, Plessy versus Ferguson, and Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yes. Marbury
Those-
Marbury is the first one I always mention because it's the most famous court case. And this court case relates back to the constitutional power of the judicial branch. They have the power to dismiss a law if it's unconstitutional. So the Marbury versus Madison is the first court case to decide if a law is constitutional. Up until this point, that power hasn't been used. That's why it's the most famous. Yeah, you're right. Plessy versus Ferguson, Marbury, and Brown versus Ford. Sounds like you've been in one of my sessions. Those are the three I always talk about. Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Ford. So yeah. And these relate back to everything up here. Bill of Rights, the right to remain silent. That would be the Miranda versus Arizona.
Okay.
Miranda versus Arizona is where we get the term Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. That's the Miranda rights. That's where the Fifth Amendment is from. So yeah, knowing those, and I know you've probably heard of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments and stuff like that, then you are pretty good. Economics is another place you could also talk about, because that's another competency that they love to mention. I think on my test, I had 12 questions economics wise.
I don't know how many I had, but I saved the little, the little sheet they send you. I saved that in my email. So when I go back to study, I always know which competency I did not do well on.
And they'll switch it up, they'll change it. There's no way to know exactly where they're going to pull questions from. Yeah. I know mine had 12 questions and 8 of them were supply and demand alone. So insane. If you're not familiar with supply and demand, definitely know your supply and demand.
For sure.
Yeah. Other things I'm going to mention are opportunity cost. You might see a question on opportunity cost. Believe me, you need to know that, because I did not know that until I started studying for a test. Never heard of it in my life. My girlfriend has got a business. She's like, oh yeah, I know what that is. I'm like, well, of course you do. It's in business. It's not in teaching.
It's not in education. Come on now.
Exactly. So supply and demand, opportunity cost, scarcity. We've lived through a scarcity, COVID. So you've seen the power, value, the effect of scarcity. Trying to find toilet paper in the middle of the pandemic, there was a scarcity. So don't need to explain that one too much. I would say definitely know your governments, know your different governments. There is a ton of governments to know, knowing what a command economy is, knowing what kind of democracy the United States is. Those are good things to know on a test. You will see those on the test. USA is a representative democracy. Because there's way too many people. We're not going to count all 7 billion votes. That would take years. So we're just going to have a representative, aka the president, be in charge of that stuff. China is like, or not really China, North Korea is a command economy. Knowing the difference between that and a mixed and a traditional economy, that's going to help you out a ton as well. I hope I'm going over things that are going to help, that are helping you. I'm just kind of brain dumping kind of things that I think are going to be useful. Geography, big one, right? Geography, let's mention that there is Texas. It's a Texas test. So if you're going to say geography, focus on Texas geography. It's important to know the different regions of the United States, but don't waste your time knowing the regions of the world. If at most you're going to get one question relating to longitude and latitude, and it's going to ask you which continent is like in what region based off of that. So, knowing like where Asia is and stuff like that, that's what I would recommend knowing. Don't waste your time memorizing the big fancy places of the world. They're not going to be on a test. Geography wise, you will want to know, absolute location. Knowing the difference between that term and relative, you will see that on the test.
Mm-hmm.
You will see the regions of Texas specifically. You might see a question on that. They might ask you about time zones of Texas. And more importantly, you're going to want to know what part of Texas is not in the central time zone. That's really what I would expect you to see. They're not going to ask you about a time zone on the other side of the globe. It's going to be Texas related. So knowing what time is in what place, that's what I would focus on. And geography, they give you a lot of situational questions relating to human environmental interactions. See me over here just putting dots and skipping lines. I'm just trying to shorten this for time's sake. So human environmental interactions, it's just the effects that the individuals of us have on an environment. So we've caused things like dust bowls. We have also, positively speaking, built bridges. We've built large amounts of areas and stuff, roads and stuff. So I could keep going with that. Trying to think there's anything specific. Civil War. I can't stress it enough. When we talk about US history, Civil War is one of the biggest places you're going to see questions asked on the test. You're going to see questions about not taxation. We're going to talk about slavery. We're going to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. You need to know about Battle of Gettysburg. Definitely some key things that you want to know. Battle of Gettysburg, well, let's say Battle of Gettysburg, Civil War, slavery and everything. And if I talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, know that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free slaves until after their area was conquered by the North. They weren't just freed instantly, they were freed after the North came in and took advantage of the South and actually seized the land. So Emancipation Proclamation was a chance for the slaves, the freed slaves, to fight against the South, which they did. So big, key, important information there. So I'm going a little fast for time's sake. Let me know if I'm going too fast or if there's anything in particular that you want to go over.
Okay.
Know about the Great Depression, know about what started the Great Depression, what triggered it.
Would you mind going over the Great Depression a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Do not mind at all. So the Great Depression, which occurred in the very late 1920s, is caused by a stock market crash. And a stock market crash was a time period that no one saw coming. We had had a major stock market crash. So when this period occurred, you saw a level of poverty of 25% unemployment. That's 1 in every 4 people unemployed. Tragic. Besides the Great Depression period that was going on, we also had the Dust Bowl. I think this is the key detail to know, by the way, for the Great Depression. What caused it, the stock market crash. I don't think you need to know much more, nothing relating to dates or anything like that. I think that in itself is enough. The Dust Bowl is man-made. This is where we have starved the land of water. We've taken out all of the water in the land, which has caused dust to actually pull from the ground up. And as a result, you see clouds and pillars of dust. If you do a Google search, it's like tsunami-sized amounts of dust flying at your face. It's huge. It's awful. So Dust Bowl is pretty big, probably in some parts of Texas that you're familiar with. And there's a lot of other things I can go over. The key detail that relates to the stock market crash in which we kind of solve the issue is called the New Deal. The New Deal is more or less a chance for us to build jobs when there was no jobs. FDR passed the New Deal. It supplied jobs for people who haven't been employed for years, jumpstarting the economy more or less. So we think of the New Deal as basically given a job to build a dam, maybe, so that we can create jobs out of nothing. So he creates jobs that didn't exist at the time. So it was a good idea. It actually did work. So we give FDR the credit there. We also got to mention beyond New Deal, beyond the Dust Bowl, we have to talk about what's going on later on in the world, and that is World War I. So while the United States is fighting back against a stock market crash in the Dust Bowl, World War I is occurring, which is resulting, well, in pretty much worldwide just trying to think of words. World War I is just resulting in worldwide damages to our countries. It's the first world fight, so it's a big deal because lots of places that hadn't been fighting are fighting suddenly because of a lot of militarism. They like to ask you questions relating to the triggers of things like World War I. So what triggered World War I? That would be the assassination. The assassination of Archduke. And that's the extent of what I know about the assassination. Just know that it happened in Austria. You don't need to know that for the test. But if they ask you a question about what triggered World War I, the assassination of the Archduke in Austria is the big pinnacle reason. When the Archduke was assassinated, a number of countries that were allied at the time were told to start fighting because someone got assassinated that was royalty, pretty much the equivalent to a king. And so when he was assassinated, our countries that were allied to Austria were told you need to start fighting, declaring war. And so that's why all of a sudden Germany, Russia, France, Spain, all these areas start fighting at once, creating a world war. So that's the key event there. There's nothing more you need to know really about that, just what triggers World War I. The United States at the time of World War I is practicing, I'm just going to put USA at the time, practicing isolationism, because we just had the Civil War. We don't want to go to war anymore. We don't want to fight. We don't want to be there for anyone. We want to rebuild and recover. And so United States practicing isolationism is what results in the United States becoming a superpower. We are now the most powerful country in the world because we didn't get involved with our country affairs. And so we develop a better economy and we're more powerful and capable in building more weapons, more soldiers, more food, anything. So that's going on. The United States finally enters the World War I at the very end of the war, kind of jumps in and stops everybody from fighting, ends the war because there's such a superpower and says, all right, we're not going to have this again. And so they go over to countries like Germany and they say, all right, you pay for all the damages. We called this the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles ends World War I. And Treaty of Versailles is a failure in itself because by telling Germany to pay for all of the damages, Germany is now insulted. Not only are they bankrupt, they are insulted beyond belief. And that is why later on we see a character of Adolf Hitler emerge from a party that shouldn't have won or gained power as much as it should have. So this is just key events that just kind of add to what later on happens. So World War I influences World War II. World War II influences the Cold War. They are connected. They're not separate. So World War II and World War II is triggered just because Germany wants its power back. They were the central power of Europe and they didn't have any power. And so When World War II occurs, Adolf Hitler has now gained enough soldiers, enough weapons, and they basically start going over and attacking neighboring European countries. And instead of our countries fighting back, they just kind of give Hitler whatever he wants because they don't want to get involved with another war. They just got out of a world war. And so slowly but surely, Germany acquires all of Europe. He gains power and control of all of Europe. And Germany has got his eyes on the United States, and he wants to attack and invade the United States. The problem is that's the other side of the world, so he can't just go over there. So United States responds short and simple with D-Day. And this is when a lot of soldiers from a lot of neighboring countries join, and the United States makes the biggest on-land attack against Germany. And because of, basically weapons and food that Germany didn't have to keep going, they failed and they couldn't sustain that level of power they had. And so Germany ends up failing. America takes advantage, ends that part of the World War. And then we have this little cute event called Japan that, they try to do something. They drop a little, number of attacks on us. The bombing of Pearl Harbor doesn't really work out for them. They don't really get as much as they thought they would. And so we drop a bomb on them in Hiroshima. Ooh, let me spell for a second.
Ooh.
Hiroshima. There we go. Hiroshima. And we end the fight with Japan. So the reason for why these countries are invading is because they want to expand in their size. Japan has been, on an island, and they kind of want to expand west and actually grow. And so they think they can take out the United States. It doesn't happen. Okay. Cold War, pretty big. Mm-hmm. After the World War II occurs, Cold War is really the more significant modern day war that we see. The Cold War, no fighting takes place in the Cold War. Cold War is strictly a constant armistice with Russia, where we just constantly are this close to fighting. There's a few events that occur that make us almost shoot nuclear weapons at them, but we don't, thank goodness. Cold War is all influenced by communism. And on a test, you might get a question asking about how on earth did the United States fight back against communism? You might get a question about that, and the answer is the Truman Doctrine. Mm-hmm. The Truman Doctrine is a attempt at the United States to basically send soldiers to any country fighting against communism. We see this in South Korea. You see this in modern day Afghanistan. You see this in lots of places, all get for the same reasons. So that's what I would say about that. Beyond that, I don't think you need to know much. You don't need to know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You don't need to know anything about any of those key events. Even though they're very significant, they're not going to be on the test, so I'm not going to go over them. But short and simple, the Cold War technically ended, but we really don't call it a complete victory because, Russia still has nuclear bombs, so does North Korea and China, and so we just kind of leave it at that. Beyond this, I would say no Texas history. Do you want me to go over anything for Texas history?
Maybe a few minor details about it.
Sure. I maybe you know a little bit more than I think you do. There's some people who I talk to, they've never heard of anything related to Texas history. So I just kind of go until someone stops me because people are, not really studying history anymore, I guess. All right. The Texas history, we just need to know a few things. You need to know about the key people, the individuals. Mm-hmm. Individuals. So knowing who is Sam Houston, knowing who is Stephen Austin. So yeah, knowing those people would probably be enough to know on a test. You'll probably see them on the test. So if you don't know, make sure you know him. Sam Houston, he is the first president of Texas. He came a long ways to get to that point. Stephen Austin brought the original Anglos to Texas. And so he is given a lot of credit for the founding, so to speak, of modern day Texas. We also have our things. We have the three major battles I always mention with people. The first one to start the Texas Revolution is the Battle of Gonzales. We have the second one being the Battle of the Battle of the Alamo. And the third one being the Battle of San Jacinto.
I have never heard of that one.
San Jacinto is the shortest battle you might have never heard of. The Battle of San Jacinto lasted for approximately 20 minutes. It's where Texans invaded, took the soon-to-be president of Mexico hostage, and basically told Mexico, if you give us our freedom, we'll give you your future president back. And so the San Jacinto battle is considered to be the final battle, the final major battle, so to speak. The Battle of the Alamo is famous not because Texans won, but because they held their ground against a outnumbered number of Mexican troops. But the San Jacinto battle is considered the battle in which Texans actually become victorious, where they finally seize their independence. So Battle of Gonzales is where the battling starts. That Gonzales area is on the very border of Mexico. So there's your reasoning for that. Okay. Yeah. You might get a question to ask about which battle is considered a battle of revenge on a test. That's San Jacinto battle because Texans technically lost at the Battle of the Alamo. And the San Jacinto battle is the battle of revenge because they finally get the revenge and also are victorious. So that's kind of why you might see that on a test. A few other things I could always go over. There's also the tribes. I don't know if you want to know about the native tribes or if you want to look back over these native tribes. There's a number of tribes that I think you need to know about, but do you want to go over any of them?
Probably the ones you think will show up on the test.
Cool.
Because if you think they're going to show up on the test, they might. You never know. You never know with Texas.
I don't. I do have knowledge of being a tutor with people for, I can't say how many hundreds of people I've tutored for social studies. The same tribes come up on a test. So if I cover these ones and you see any of them, you're probably going to see the ones I mentioned. So
okay. That sounds good to me. Definitely.
Yeah. Social studies is a tricky subject because it's kind of like a narrative and I can't just jump in the middle without any real background knowledge. So I hope this is helping whenever I explain it. First tribe you got to know about is the Caddo tribe. The Caddo tribe is a forest area, non-nomadic. They live in one specific area, which is in the far northeast side. Yeah, northeast side. I think about it for a second of Texas. Just know that they live in a foresty area. They're non-nomadic. The Karankawa, they are a pretty friendly tribe. They live within the central area of Texas. They live also in some parts of the South Plains area. They're just a very nomadic tribe in how they hunt for bison and other animals at the time, along with fruits and nuts and such as they can find. The Comanche is the more interesting one I'm going to mention. The Comanche is the one you're going to remember the most. Comanche is like the commanders of Texas because they ride on horseback. They are invaders. They invade our tribes and they take over tribal lands. So very straightforward. You can't forget them. You should definitely know about the Pueblos. The Pueblos are the ones who actually brought the horses to Texas. So you hear about the Columbian Exchange. That's how horses got to Texas. I'm sorry, that got to the United States in the first place. They weren't always there. They were brought in from the Columbian Exchange. So these are the ones I think you'd want to know about. The Karankawa were actually attacked by the Comanche. That's why they're kind of next to each other. And so the Karankawa had to relocate because the Comanche invaded their territory. Pueblos bringing horses is a pretty big deal to Texans because we have cowboys and stuff. And Caddo is the people who live in foresty area. They get the best of every world. They live in one spot. They don't move. So if you see a question about the Caddo, it's probably going to be what native tribe lived in the northern forest area of Texas. Look for Caddo. So, and as I said, I'm cherry picking ones, but I don't think you need to know about the 30 or 40 different tribes in Texas. There's some pretty significantly well-known ones. These are the ones you want to know about. So yeah. And that also relates to geography. You could also put them on a map and then study geography like that. I don't know. I'm just trying to build some time along for you. We mentioned Columbian Exchange, French and Indian War. I'm going through my notes to make sure I've covered as much of this as I think I need to. Constitutional Convention. We mentioned the Constitution. The Bill of Rights covers the individual rights. It's not just any rights of anyone, it's the individual rights of the United States. So if they ask you a question about which of the following documents is the individual rights, that's the Bill of Rights. So that's why it's so relevant. While there is a lot of amendments, there's no amendment that's really for individual people, whereas the Bill of Rights are guaranteed for every one of us individually. And the long story short of the Bill of Rights being created is that we were concerned that the branches of government had too much power. So the Bill of Rights made sure that government couldn't do anything like take away our guns, even though some states want to take away guns even now. So just, we can fight that all day long, but we have the Bill of Rights to back us up. All right. I didn't go over this. I'm going to put it down here at the bottom here. Manifest destiny is an easy question you're going to see on the test. Manifest destiny. This is the God-given right to expand west. So this goes along with westward expansion. So the right to move west. That sounds great on paper, but if you think about the millions of tribes we kind of exterminated in the process, it's not really that nice. There was better ways to do it, but the Louisiana Purchase, LA, Louisiana, that was a horrible way to that, but I'll put it there anyways. Louisiana Purchase, that more than doubled the United States size. You can thank TJ, Thomas Jefferson. And Clark for going about finding a waterway to China and failing, but in the process, eventually expanding the United States, doubling its size. This goes hand in hand, these two. Manifest Destiny, Louisiana Purchase, they're both all about expansion. So we bought land from the French. It was very cheap. All righty. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Is there anything else that you would like to go over in particular?
I'm
going through my notes, seeing there's particular. We mentioned economic scarcity, opportunity cost. We mentioned the geography, 5 themes, time zones, regions of Texas, the regions of the United States. Government, you will want to know your amendments 100%. The key ones I mentioned, 13, 14, 15, the 19th one. These are the big 4. They're always going to be seen on the test. Court cases, we mentioned those, the 3 branches, the Bill of Rights. That covers a good chunk of it. Is there anything else that you'd like to go over?
Maybe the big amendments like the 13th, 14th, 15th, and the 19th.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some people I say, all right, do you know your amendments? They're like, yes, don't even mention them. I'm like, okay. All right. So amendments wise, I want to mention these in chunks. So 13th, 14th, and 15th, just know right off the bat, these 3 all relate to slavery. I wrote shavery. Hold on. Slavery. So all 3 of these relate to slavery. all of these implicate something to fighting against slavery. The 13th one, the unlucky number 13th, ends slavery. Ends slavery. It's pretty big, right? Pretty big detail. The 14th one actually gives slaves, or I should say freed slaves, citizenship. So now you're not just a freed slave, now you are a citizen of the United States. Okay. The 15th one is freed slaves that are now citizens also have the right to vote. Right to vote. And that seems like a very trivial thing, but when we're talking about African Americans who had been slaves up until now are now freed and allowed to vote, well, that kind of triggers the women of the world. And so we see later on the 19th Amendment, because this one relates to women's suffrage or women right to vote. Women's right to vote. There's a ton of amendments. There's ones relating to alcoholism and land ownership and stuff. I don't think they're as relevant as you think. If you know your Bill of Rights and these four here, I think you should be good. I don't think they're going to ask about many other ones. If you want to talk about them, the 18th Amendment, that would be prohibition.
I was fixing to bring that one up, actually.
Yeah, prohibition. I don't know if you saw that one on the test, but the 18th is prohibition. The one that undid prohibition is the 21st. This amendment was passed like 13 years later, something like that. I don't know. I'm not a historian, but undid prohibition. Which I think is funny because it's the 21st Amendment. Now the drinking age is 21. So I don't know. I think that's funny. But yeah, I think this would be case in point what you'd want to know. These on top of the Bill of Rights covers a good chunk of the amendments. If you're studying the Bill of Rights, there's plenty of visuals that can help you out with that. Don't just study them like facts. They make sense. If the First Amendment is the freedom of speech, the second one has to be your right to bear arms, because actions speak louder than words. Those two go together. And so when you're putting these together, you should think of it like that. So that way it doesn't just sound like a bunch of trivial knowledge. So
Okay.
I hope I'm doing all right. Time-wise, we're doing great. I can spend a few extra minutes if there's anything else you'd want to go over.
Out of everything, I would say that the amendments would probably be the biggest thing on that test. The amendment.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely.
History is big, but here, just remember, if they ask you a question about freed slaves from history, that's indirectly also related to amendments. And it's very easy to miss these questions on amendments. Amendments in court cases, amendments in court cases. If you want to jump your score up without doing a lot of studying, knowing those two things alone really will help you out. Economics wise, knowing supply and demand. If you know what supply and demand is really well, that's at least 8 or 9 questions free to you on a test. So definitely know supply and demand. And if I didn't go over it enough, just know supply influences demand. If you have a small amount of supply, if your supply is short, if you only have 2 toys to give kids for Christmas and there's 30 kids to give toys to, well, it's probably going to cost a lot of money to get those toys to get to those kids. And so that means demand's going to be really high if you have a small amount of supply of toys. Just because it's Christmas. You could say bananas. If there's only 2 bananas and 1,000 guys want bananas, well, you're going to have to sell a banana for $1 million. If you have an excessive amount of bananas, if your supply is high, that's why the arrow is going up. If your supply is really high, and you know your bananas are going to go bad in a few weeks, you need to sell all of those thousands of bananas, then you're probably going to lower the price so that there's more demand for it, the lowering of price. So, and as demand goes down, supply goes up. So you see that fluctuation going. And if there's less demand, I'm gonna color match it actually. Let's do blue. See less demand, lower price. There's a higher demand, it's a higher price,
Mhm.
higher supply. But yeah, those are all very basic, but they're going to give you like situational questions about them. And can't say anything more. That's just really how it is. Supply and demand though is relevant to everyday worldly things. So I like it. Opportunity cost, you can look that one up if you want. Opportunity cost relates to the decision makings that we have every day. So I make an opportunity cost decision when I choose to go to a movie or study. If I choose to go to a movie, I can't get that time back to study, right? So I've made an opportunity cost decision. If there's a total of 3 options, if I could go to a movie, go to a concert, or maybe watch a television show program, I might choose a television show program over the other two because it's going to take the least amount of my time so I can do other things. Or maybe it's just cheaper. There's a lot of reasons for opportunity costs that relate to everyday life decisions. Okay. So, but yeah, I do hope this was useful to you. It's a lot of information in social studies. I'm also attaching a document. Let me just get your email real quick. This is a document that just kind of jots down a list of things that I think you definitely want to know. But yeah, let me see if I can get it out to you real quick. What's your email?
I'm actually going to put my email in the chat.
Sure, I understand.
Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely. That works just fine.
All right, I just sent it to you.
Sweet. All right, let's see. Awesome. Also, you are the first person that I've done one of these tutoring sessions with in quite a while. So thank you for being person number 1 in the past few months. It gave me a moment to kind of refresh on how I do things. I hope it was very informative for you. You don't need to do but just one session for each subject. I hope you pass your test on your next try.
I sure do hope so, because I got 2 big job offers in front of me.
All right, what are you hoping to do? Are you hoping to teach?
Yes.
Awesome. What position are you? Do you have a job offer for? Can I ask?
Yes, absolutely. I actually have a job offer for the district I actually currently work for. Actually, at the school I currently work for.
That's just so darn nice, isn't it?
Yes. And then I have one in Conroe ISD as well.
And in which ISD?
I work for Spring ISD.
Okay.
Go to Conroe ISD if I pass this test.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's cool. That's really cool. Are you hoping to teach social studies? What subject do you want to teach?
Math and science.
Woo. I can handle the science, but I'm not sure if I can handle the math portion. Are you teaching upper grades, like 4th, 5th, or 6th?
I'm doing 4th and 5th.
Okay. You said 3rd, 4th, and 5th?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a different world than I live in. So are you doing like all of these in 1 year? 3rd, 4th, and 5th all at once?
No.
Okay, gotcha. Those are just the areas you want to teach.
Yes, definitely.
Gotcha. Well, cool. I taught 4th grade math. I just sent that to you. I taught 4th grade math this this past fall, and man, it's a lot. I don't know how you guys do it.
I was in a 4th grade math and science classroom when I was in student teaching.
Really? 4th grade math? Oh, well, hey, that's actually pretty darn nice, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
All righty. I'm about to send you the notes as well that we just took. So you have a copy of those. I'm looking at the chat now. So let's see. All right, Mr. Harrington. What part of Texas are you in?
I'm in the southeast side of Texas.
Okay, southeast. So are you southeast? Are you near Houston?
I actually live in Houston.
Okay. Then you are definitely experiencing some crazy forecasts right now.
Definitely. One day it's cold and the next day it's hot. Come on now. Make up your mind.
Absolutely. I can hear the accent. I was like, man, he must live in one of the southern areas. Well, that's cool. All right. Well, I just sent you both of those documents to you. I'm just making sure. Let's see. All right. Yep. I sent both of them to you. They should be in your email inbox. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I love doing these sessions for you guys, but I want to make sure you're prepared for that test. So if there's something I missed or something that comes up you later want to know about, just shoot me a text on Facebook or email me directly. I'll get back to you.
Definitely. I definitely will do that.
All right. Also, on that note, I just finished